Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Welcome to Grow the Info, where I like to bring you good, solid information that you can verify yourself, and I try to give you a broad perspective and not just mainstream media regurgitation. So, we are going to be streaming a hearing on online platforms and marketing in the digital economy. This is the fifth part in a series that the House is conducting on these topics regarding platforms and marketing, obviously, but also like small town newspapers and the big international kinds of news firms and everything, and comparing them. So if you're interested in seeing some of the things that they have said in the previous hearings, then you need to look at the Judiciary Committee YouTube page. Now, earlier in the stream I had this morning, when I thought they were going to be doing this hearing, I did show you that, I'm sorry, you can hear my phone. I did show you that YouTube page, but that is not where they are holding this stream right now. So I'm going to show you what the YouTube channel is that they're streaming from right now, in case they don't post this to the Judiciary Committee YouTube page later on. But of course, you can find the stream by going to house.gov as well. So make sure that you are subscribed and turn on bell notifications. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. At Grow the Info is our name, all over the place. And check out our website, growtheinfo.com, for all kinds of good information. So, of course, online platforms is something that independent journalists and alternative media types and truthers and everything that we are trying to utilize to get this information out. That we see all this stuff happening and we want to spread the information. Unfortunately, it's very hard to do that when the algorithms just want to promote, the popular mainstream media narrative over and over and over again. So this morning I broke down a little bit of how YouTube and other platforms work and how they work with companies, how they take your data, different ways that they can, how they sell it, why they sell it, and how it's kind of just keeping us in this loop because truthers and stuff, when we try to put out information, and I'm finding this very hard to grow my channel, is that, and my internet's going crazy. Please don't die, internet. Please don't die. So when you put out a story, when you put out information, oftentimes there is a mainstream media news source that is putting out something similar, and so they get blasted all over the place. And they could even be reporting something that is verifiably untrue, but they are still considered the authority on journalism and reporting, even though there are people that are using actual facts and statistics and other things, to try to get the information out there, and they're using things that you can verify, which is why I try to do that here. But that information just doesn't get out, and it's not always even necessarily because people aren't finding it important. It can just be being filtered out. So if you're curious on how they kind of do that, then you can check out this morning's stream where I broke down some of that, and I did go through who all of the witnesses were. I'm going to remind everybody again quickly. I really hope my internet doesn't die. Please don't die, internet. I hope the replay is okay at least. Alright, so we're going to go through the witness list quickly because it's very interesting, just to remind us who everybody is. And the reason why I found it interesting is because they are having the CEO of Pop Sockets on the panel. So, like I said earlier, welcome to 2020. So we have Patrick Spence, CEO of Sonos. That is a digital company. They make fancy speakers, Alexa kind of, Cortana kind of speakers, the Google Home things and everything. All the high-tech ones that have all the listening devices and are connected to all the crazy networks and everything. Yep, that's what they do. David Barnett, founder and CEO of PopSockets LLC. PopSockets are the things that you can put on your phone, and it's like it looks kind of like a doorknob on the back, but it makes it a lot easier to hold. But on their website, you can see that they actually sell a lot of other digital stuff. And of course, they're, partnering with other companies as well. We have David Heinemeier, Hansson, co-founder and CTO of Basecamp LLC. Basecamp is a platform where you can put in your employees and your coworkers and stuff information to work together on projects, kind of like that app that's called Monday. It's similar to that, but people don't really realize that when they do that, that is tying all of their other information, whatever email you use, all of the other information that is linked to that email, these third-party hosts are now getting access to. And then we have Kirsten Daru, Vice President and General Counsel for Tile. Tile is, I have never heard of it. I never heard of Basecamp either. So that's what that is, or Sonos actually. But Tile, and I showed this earlier, it's a little tiny GPS tracker. That's what that is. Okay, and then earlier in the stream, I also went through this interesting email that I got from the State Department on the establishment for the Center of Analytics. And it's definitely worth a read through quickly. They're probably going to start the hearing soon, though, so I'm not going to read through it again. But I did this morning, and it should be something that we need to, pay attention to. So there is all of that information. And let's see if they have started yet. It doesn't look like they have started yet. All right, and I need to show you guys where you can find this on YouTube. So this is being hosted on the Colorado Law YouTube page. So it's, nothing with judiciary in the title or house or anything like that. It just says Colorado Law is the YouTube page. They were trying to be sneaky. Always trying to be sneaky. And it is live. Let me go ahead and refresh though, just to make sure. I'm on a dinosaur computer that is literally held together with masking tape because duct tape is too expensive. So, alrighty. They have not started yet. Okay, well then, I am going to take this opportunity to remind you all that we just streamed a facial recognition hearing yesterday, I believe it was, on facial recognition. And that actually ties in a lot to what we're talking about. Online marketing, and they're going to start now. So online marketing, they like to use scans of your facial expressions so they know how that you're responding to ads. And they like to use your phone I have a super old Galaxy S4, and it can read my eyeball movement. So they harvest all that information too, and they use it and they sell it to ad companies who then sell the information back to the people that are buying ad space, because that way you know how people are responding to your ads, so you know how to make them better or whatever to get whatever kind of reaction that you want. I'm sorry I'm talking so quickly. I can see them all filing into the little room thingamajig. So this is what I'm looking at. That's why I started talking quickly. And now watch, they'll take like 10 minutes to get to their seats. Thank you so much for joining, everybody, by the way. Of course, every time that you spend a minute here, that helps spread information. And, what they're talking about today with this has to do with spreading information and stuff too, not just small businesses and, stuff like that. But every time you guys spend even a minute here, you hit that like button, every single little bit does help. Every number helps. So thank you so much, you guys. You are wonderful and amazing. And thank you, Bo. I saw you. What's up? Oh, ha, ha, ha. Oh, so funny. Oh, so funny. Yeah, now they're going to take forever to get to their seats. I hope you guys are doing well. And the previous parts of the hearings that they have held, I am working on putting together like little clips of them, of the most important parts and the parts that I think apply most to, all of us and those of us who are trying to do independent journalism and alt media and stuff. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure that you're subscribed. so that way you can see that when it comes out. But they are definitely worth a look. If you like to sit through hearings, go and look at the Judiciary Committee YouTube page, and they have them all.
Without objection, the chair is authorized
thank you for watching.
to recesses at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing, Online Platforms and Market Power, Part 5, Competitors in the Digital Economy. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. It's a pleasure to be here at the University of Colorado Law School for today's hearing, the 5th in the subcommittee's series on online platforms and market power, and the subcommittee's first field hearing in more than a decade. In July, the subcommittee received testimony from executives representing the 4 dominant online platforms, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, along with a panel of leading experts about the effect of market power in the digital economy on innovation and entrepreneurship. Through both that hearing and other parts of the subcommittee's investigation, it has become clear that these firms have tremendous power as gatekeepers to shape and control commerce online. As Stacy Mitchell, the director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, testified, and I quote, "A growing share of our commerce now flows through a handful of digital platforms. These powerful gatekeepers not only control market access, but also directly compete with the businesses that depend on them," end quote. It is apparent that the dominant platforms are increasingly using their gatekeeper power in abusive and coercive ways. Because these platforms function as bottlenecks for online commerce, they're able to set the terms and conditions of competition, giving them immense power to pick winners and losers in the online economy. It is far too common to hear horror stories from startups and other small businesses about how a dominant platform's abrupt changes have destroyed their business. A single sudden change to an algorithm, a software update, or new product design can be disastrous for the millions of companies that depend on these platforms to get to market. And because these platforms actively compete with the very business they rely on them, what may be portrayed as an innocent change could very well be a deliberate strategy to crush any existing or potential competition. Companies across the online ecosystem, both large and small, have found themselves dependent on the arbitrary whim of these platform giants, one algorithm tweak away from ruin. In many cases, there is little notice or any real recourse for the companies that are disadvantaged by the platform's conduct. Because their decisions are largely unaccountable, opaque, and result in sweeping consequences, the dominant platforms effectively serve as private regulators. The dominant platforms can also use their gatekeeper power to dictate anti-competitive, take-it-or-leave-it contract terms. Startups and small businesses have had to sign away certain basic rights or even hand over valuable data to a competitor as the price of accessing their customers through the platform. Such coercive terms of doing business would undoubtedly be absent in a competitive marketplace. For locally owned businesses that are the economic lifeblood of their communities as both job creators and engines of prosperity, this gatekeeper power and how the platforms are exercising it is of tremendous concern. Many small businesses are forced to rely on dominant platforms to advertise or sell their products and services online. In many cases, they do not have an alternative. Earlier this week, my staff spoke with an online seller whose entire economic livelihood and his family's health has been jeopardized by one of the dominant platform's sudden, arbitrary, and reckless decision to suspend his business and block access to his inventory. Not only does this dynamic threaten ongoing competition, but it also has lasting effects as a powerful disincentive for new entrants to try and to compete with powerful incumbents. As Patrick Spence, the CEO of Sonos, will testify today, this shuttering of competition online dries up the venture capital new companies need to develop the next inventions and to bring them to market. Venture capital firms are well aware of the kill zone that surrounds startups that pass within striking distance of the dominant platforms. They stay away from those investments, end quote. Today we will hear from the CEOs, founders, and senior executives of several dynamic and innovative companies that must confront this economic nightmare. Each of the innovative companies represented here today, Sonos, PopSockets, Tile, and Basecamp, are American success stories. I applaud them for their courage to share their testimony in the face of potential retaliation by the dominant platforms. We've been in touch with a number of companies with similar perspectives that understandably will not testify due to this very real concern. With that, I want to thank the esteemed panel of witnesses for joining us today. I also want to thank Subcommittee Vice Chair Congressman DeGoose, who represents Boulder, Colorado, and advocated strongly that the field hearing be in his district. I also want to thank Dean Jim Anaya and all of the hardworking professors and professional staff at Colorado Law who assisted us in having this hearing today, and thank them for hosting. And I particularly want to welcome and thank Congressman Ken Buck from Colorado, who is an esteemed member of the subcommittee and has been very active in this investigation, and a representative of Colorado's 4th Congressional District. And I'd now like to recognize him for the purposes of making an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I very much appreciate you holding this hearing in God's country and joining us here in God's country for the hearing. And I am very appreciative that my friends, Congressman Neguse and Congressman Perlmutter, have left the swamp with me last night on a plane to get here, and we are here safely and working on this important issue. Today, as we continue our oversight of the state of competition in the tech center, our focus is shifting from looking at how larger digital platforms operate to hearing what it is like to compete with these platforms. Each of our panelists represent companies that are in the arena, innovating and competing daily to deliver value to customers. They have real skin in the game, and we look forward to learning from their unique perspectives. To begin, I want to review the principles that I think Congress should focus on in our inquiry. First, innovation and competition in the tech center have produced enormous value for consumers. We should not forget about those benefits as we consider the current state of competition in the tech center. Second, any legislative proposals that emerge from our inquiry should be consistent with maintaining a free and competitive marketplace. Proposals to construct broad new regulatory regimes must be viewed with caution. Experience has shown that burdensome regulations often miss the mark. Regulations often come too late to resolve anything, and this approach is often less efficient than the free market. Regulators are often not nimble enough to keep pace with a dynamic marketplace, so that the regulatory regime has the effect of entrenching incumbents rather than encouraging competition. Third, big is not necessarily bad. Antitrust laws do not exist to punish success, but to promote competition. Congress should help foster an atmosphere where ideas flourish and startups can innovate fairly compete, grow, and succeed. With these principles in mind, over the past few years, we have seen the largest platforms continue to expand and increase their market power. The increased concentration and market power of a small group of companies has raised concerns from a diverse array of constituencies about how that power is being used. This includes domestic and international regulators and enforcement authorities, small, medium, and large companies, and consumers. Our task during these hearings has been to evaluate whether true antitrust harms are occurring in the tech center, and if so, whether the existing antitrust laws are adequate to address these harms. To understand these complex questions, we have invited a diverse panel of market participants, companies that compete directly with the large platforms, that rely on the services of the large platforms, and in some cases both compete with and rely on the large platforms. Companies that both compete with and rely on the largest digital platforms have become more and more common, especially as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple have continued to expand into broader and more diverse business lines. We know that many tech companies rely on the infrastructure services provided by large platform companies in order to serve their customers, while simultaneously having to directly compete with the platform companies. To demonstrate, consider the hypothetical company A that competes with one of Google's products, but also relies on a different Google product to run its business. Or relatedly, company B relies on Amazon or Apple's platform for its success, and then Amazon or Apple launches a new product that competes directly with company B. In these circumstances, the question arises of where the line sits between fierce and healthy competition and anti-competitive conduct. Do the large platforms use their market power in one business line to harm competitors in another business line? And if that does occur, how do we determine whether the allegedly harmful conduct was motivated solely by a desire to improve the product, or whether there was anti-competitive motive? I hope that our panel can discuss these and other related questions today. Each of our panelists has significant experience competing in the digital economy, and they have a unique perspective to offer us today. I look forward to learning from them so that we can better understand what competing with or relying on the largest platforms looks like in the real world. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Before I introduce our panel of witnesses, we are also joined by the distinguished representative from the 7th Congressional District, Mr. Perlmutter, who serves both on the Financial Services, the Rules Committee, and Science and Technology, and has been involved in this area in a number of different ways, and I'd ask unanimous consent of the committee to allow Mr. Perlmutter to participate in full in this hearing. Without objection, it is so ordered. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Patrick Spence, the Chief Executive Officer at Sonos. Mr. Spence joined Sonos in 2012 as their Chief Commercial Officer and has played a central role in the development and launch of some of the company's most successful products. Before starting at Sonos, Mr. Spence spent more than 14 years at IBM BlackBerry in a variety of roles, ultimately becoming Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing. He was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40 in 2007. Mr. Spence received an honor's degree from Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario. Our second witness is David Barnett. He's founder and CEO of PopSocket LLC. Before founding PopSockets, Mr. Barnett was a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado Boulder, specializing in the philosophy of language. He developed an interest in entrepreneurship and began designing products to prevent earbud cords from dangling. In the process of developing a specialized iPhone case funded through a successful Kickstarter campaign, Mr. Barnett stumbled upon the Pop Grip. It has gone on to become PopSocket's flagship product and one of the most popular mobile device attachments on the market. In 2015, Mr. Barnett left the University of Colorado to focus full-time on running PopSockets. Mr. Barnett received his BA in philosophy from Emory University, his BA in physics from the University of Colorado Boulder, and his PhD in philosophy from New York University. Our third witness is David Heinemeier Hansson. Mr. Hansson is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Basecamp LLC, a project management and communications software used by hundreds of organizations like Shopify, NASA, and the University of Miami. He is also the creator of Ruby on Rails, an open source web framework used by programmers at GitHub, Airbnb, Kickstarter, and Goodreads. Mr. Hansson is also the author of multiple books about successful business management, including It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work and the New York Times bestseller, Rework. Mr. Hansson received his bachelor's degree from the Copenhagen Business School. The last witness on our first panel is Kirsten Daru, Vice President and General Counsel at Tile. Prior to joining Tile in 2019, Ms. Daru served as the Chief Privacy Officer at Electronic Arts. There she led all elements of EA's eternal data privacy compliance, employee data privacy training, and litigation involving consumer claims. She was also the lead attorney for all international privacy matters. She started her legal career as an attorney at Reed Smith LLP. Ms. Daru received her BA from the University of California, Davis, and her JD from the University of San Francisco School of Law. We welcome all of our very distinguished witnesses and really thank you for participating in today's hearing. Now, if you would please rise, I will begin by swearing you in. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? I do. Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Please know that each of your written statements will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude. It's actually here. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired, and we'd like you to conclude. And we'll begin, Mr. Spence. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Chairman Cicilline, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and distinguished members of this committee for the opportunity to appear here today. It is my privilege to lead a company that is a classic American success story. Sonos was founded in Santa Barbara, California in 2002 by a handful of entrepreneurs that wanted to make it easier and better to be able to listen to great music throughout your home. Today, we employ over 1,500 people, and our products have been welcomed into more than 9 million homes. We are a classic innovation and growth story. We've grown our customer base, our product portfolio, and our revenue every year since our founding almost 20 years ago. In mid-2018, we enjoyed another rite of passage of many American success stories. We became a public company on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. The scope and scale of our innovation is reflected in our portfolio of over 750 patents, a number that continues to grow every year as we invest heavily in new innovation. We believe that if we keep working hard to make great new products, we'll win new customers, and they'll come back and buy more products. I welcome this committee's invitation to testify because I'm concerned that the market conditions that allowed us to innovate and thrive over the past 2 decades are being endangered by the rise of a small group of dominant companies with unprecedented power. We believe that this committee needs to act urgently to rein in the power of these dominant companies in order to support the market conditions for the next big ideas to emerge and to create a fair playing field for new, emerging, innovative companies. Today, I would like to focus in on 3 trends in particular. The first trend is how these dominant companies are using their power in one market to conquer or destroy adjacent markets, especially markets that may one day present a challenge to their current dominance. Voice technology has transformed smart speakers into the latest gateway to the internet. They connect you to the music you love and to many of the most important services on the internet, from e-commerce to search. For Google and Amazon specifically, the development of the smart speaker market, the one in which we invented and operate, presents both a threat and an opportunity. The threat that if other companies were to be successful in the smart speaker market, they might stand between these dominant companies and customers. The opportunity for these companies is to dominate yet another important consumer market, and, more critical, to use smart speakers to collect vast amounts of consumer data which can be monetized on their already dominant platforms. These dominant firms have seized this opportunity. They have flooded the market with dramatically price-subsidized products, giving them away at steep discounts or even for free. Indeed, they are on record stating that their products themselves are money losers. Now they control roughly 85% of the US smart speaker market. This is terrible for the innovative dynamic created by fair competition because it hamstrings those companies that have better products that cannot afford to be sold at a loss. And in the long term, prices are sure to go up once these dominant companies have driven the other companies out of the market and reduced competition. The second issue is that these dominant companies are exploiting their role as essential business partners and to tilt the playing field in favor of their own products and services. These companies have such dominance and breadth across a variety of markets, they become essential business partners for every company. Our relationships with them at times are productive and mutually beneficial, as these firms also value access to our large and growing customer base. But these dominant companies have a huge amount of power. Gaining access to their platforms and integrating their services are becoming more and more of a take-it-or-leave-it proposition, with demands such as early and technically detailed access to our future products, sharing proprietary business data, including sales forecasts, and waiving essential contractual rights. These companies have gone so far as demanding that we suppress our inventions in order to work with them. The most recent example of this is Google's refusal to allow us to use multiple voice assistants on our products simultaneously. And the third important issue is the practice of efficient infringement. These dominant companies disregard inventions and patents because they are so powerful, and they are doing the cost-benefit analysis of infringing now and paying later once they've achieved dominance and moved past the point where they have to worry about competition in that market. They are exploiting today's system and enforcement to extend their dominance from one market to the next, and a recently filed patent infringement case against Google illustrates our point. We have provided more details in our written testimony. We believe in competition and have competed and won through innovation and hard work against much larger companies to get to where we are today. However, we are in a moment now, and I say this with 20 years in the consumer technology industry, where today's dominant companies have so much power across such a broad array of markets and continue to leverage that power to expand into new markets that we need to rethink existing laws and policies to determine if they're still achieving the spirit in which they were set out. We believe that independent companies and a system which fosters new startups have never been more important to the future of innovation, because fair competition breeds creativity and progress and makes America better for everyone, not just dominant and powerful few. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spence. Mr. Barnett, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Sure. First, thank you, Honorable Chairman, and the other members of the committee for having me. You ready? I'll tell you first the story of PopSockets and then some challenges that we've had with Amazon. PopSockets started about 6 years ago in my garage just west of where we're sitting right here when I was a philosophy professor at the University of Colorado. I launched the business around our flagship product, which is I have one on my phone, but a grip and a stand for a phone. So that's how it started. We now have a full family of products around this product. In these 6 years, we've grown to about 270 employees. There's thousands of people around the world whose livelihoods depend now on PopSockets indirectly through different businesses. We've sold over 165 million units of this product, and I feel lucky to have realized one version of the American dream in part by participating in America's free market economy and being able to transact with millions of Americans and thousands of companies in order to create this success. So today I want to talk about two challenges that we've had with Amazon, one involving counterfeits, the other involving bullying or strong-arming. So we started our direct relationship with Amazon about a year and a half into business, so the middle of 2016. We started selling product to Amazon. Amazon, in turn, would sell our product on the marketplace. It was immensely successful. Within 5 months, Amazon became our largest customer, and we became one of Amazon's most significant players in the mobile electronics accessory category. Pop sockets was the number 3 search term at some point on Amazon. So we had immense success, but despite the success, we never felt like we had a genuine partnership with Amazon. So the problem of counterfeits is the first problem I'll talk about. We had enormous amounts of fake product that were taking our sales, creating bad customer experiences, and of course it was illegal. So illegal activity on behalf of those selling them. And when Amazon was the seller, Amazon was clearly engaged in this illegal activity. And multiple times we discovered that Amazon itself had sourced counterfeit product and was selling it alongside our own product. For a year and a half, we requested that Amazon take some action, some serious action, and just require evidence from sellers that they were selling authentic product. After a year and a half, finally, in exchange for about $1.8 million of retail marketing funds, which my team deemed ineffective, Amazon agreed to work with their brand registry department to require this evidence, and things then changed dramatically. So that problem largely went away. There was another problem of knockoffs, products not using the PopSockets name, that took a while longer to go away. At one point, we were reporting 1,000 listings a day of fakes. Every day, 1,000 different listings of fakes that were eating away at our revenue and really harming our brand too. Next, I want to turn to bullying, the lack of a symmetrical partnership. The way Amazon works is, we sign an agreement together, so there's what's in the written record of the agreement. Everything looks good. We decide on a sale price to Amazon. Then what happens in practice is that Amazon decides what price they want to sell to the consumer for, and after they do this, often lowering the price, they come back to us and demand funding for their lost margin when they lower their price. There's nothing in our agreement that says that we're required to pay for this, and yet they say we need this, we expect this. The bullying begins. We decided to end our relationship with Amazon over this. This was one reason we cited when we gave to Amazon. Their response was, no, you're not leaving the relationship. I found that unbelievable that they would tell us that we were going to continue in the relationship after we told them that bullying was the main reason we were leaving. We left anyway. They proceeded to remove the listings of our authorized reseller, all of the listings on Amazon, preventing an authorized reseller from selling. They refused to clarify the language around their policy that they cited in doing this, caused great harm to our company. And while bullying is not technically illegal, when there's bullying by an extremely successful company with all these partners that continue to do business with it, one has to ask, how is it that such a successful business maintains partnerships with so many companies while bullying them? It's because of the power asymmetry, of course, that companies tolerate this. They have to tolerate it.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Mr. Hansson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to provide testimony here. My name is David Heinemeier Hansson, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of Basecamp, a small internet company from Chicago that sells project management and team collaboration software. When we launched our main service back in 2004, the internet provided a largely free, fair, and open marketplace. We could reach customers and provide them with our software without having to ask any technology company for permission or pay them for the privilege. Today, this is practically no longer true. The internet has been colonized by a handful of big tech companies that wield their monopoly power without restraint. This power allowed them to bully, extort, or should they please, even destroy our business, unless we accept their often onerous, exploitive, and ever-changing terms and conditions. These big tech companies control if customers are able to find us online, whether customers can access our software using their mobile devices, and define the questionable ethics of what a competitive marketing campaign must look like. A small company like ours simply has no real agency to resist or reject the rules set by big tech. And neither do consumers. The promise that the internet was going to cut out the middleman has been broken. We're all left to accept that these companies can and do alter the deal, any deal, however they please, and whenever they do, our only recourse is to pray that they do not alter it any further. Let's start with Google. Their monopoly in internet search is near total, and their multi-billion-dollar bribes to browser makers like Apple ensure no fair competition will ever have a chance to emerge. Google uses this monopoly to extort businesses like ours to pay for the privilege that consumers who search for our trademarked brand name can find us. Because if we don't, they will sell our brand name as misdirection to our competitors. Google feigns interest in recognizing trademark law by banning the use of trademark terms in app copy, but puts the onus of enforcement on victims and does nothing to stop repeat offenders. Unless, of course, the trademark terms are belonging to Google itself. Then enforcement is swift and automatic. You will find no competitor ads for any of Google's own important properties. Google would never have been able to capture a monopoly in search by acting like this from the start, misdirecting consumers, blanketing search results with ads, and shaking down small businesses. In the absence of meaningful regulation, they will continue to extract absurd monopoly rents while bribing browser makers to ensure nothing changes. Apple, too, enjoys the spoils of monopoly pricing power. With the App Store, they own one of the only two mobile application stores that matter. The other belongs to Google. This cozy duopoly has allowed Apple to keep fees on payment processing for application makers like ours exorbitantly high. Whereas a competitive market like that for credit card processing is only able to sustain around a 2% fee for merchants, Apple, along with Google, has been able to charge an outrageous 30% for years on end. Apple may claim that they do more than payment processing for this fee, such as hosting applications or providing discovery, but the company undercuts this argument by giving these services away for free to application makers who do not charge for their applications. But worse still is the draconian restrictions and merciless retribution that Apple brings to bear on application makers who dare to decline using Apple's payment services. Even a mere link to an external webpage that explains how to sign up for a service that doesn't use Apple's payment system can get your application rejected or removed from the App Store. Every application maker using Apple's App Store live in fear that their next update is denied or their application is entirely removed. All it takes is being assigned the wrong review clerk who chooses to interpret the often vague and confusing rules different than the last. Then you'll be stuck in an appeals process that would make Kafka blush. Finally, Facebook's industrial-scale vacuuming of everyone's personal data has created an ad-targeting machine so devastatingly effective that the company, together with, guess who, Google, is currently capturing virtually all growth in internet advertisement. I quote a report in my written testimony that put that capture between Facebook and Google at 99% in 2016. Not even Putin would dare brag of an approval rating that high. Facebook is able to maintain this iron grip on the collection of personal data by continuing to buy any promising competitor. The acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp should never have been approved by regulators and need to be urgently undone. This creates a marketplace where companies that wish not to partake in the wholesale violation of consumer privacy is at a grave disadvantage. If you choose not to take advantage of this terrifying and devastatingly effective ad machine, your competitors surely will. This has been but a brief taste of what it's like to live as a small tech company in a digital world owned and operated by big tech. And I didn't even touch on the misery that is to attempt direct head-on competition with any of these conglomerates. But at some point, all companies will be competing against big tech, simply because big tech is bent on expanding until it does absolutely everything. The aforementioned companies already do payment processing, credit card issuing, music distribution, TV producing, advertising networks, map making, navigation services, alarm systems, cameras, computers, medical devices, and about 1 billion other things. Help us, Congress. You're our only hope.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. Now recognize Ms. Daru for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
I'd like to thank Chairman Cicilline and the members of the subcommittee for convening this hearing and to Vice Chair Neguse for hosting. My name is Kirsten Daru, and I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and General Counsel of Tile. Tile helps people find lost items. Our devices work with our Tile app, which is available on iOS and Android to help people find their wallet, purse, keys, you name it. We also embed our technology into third-party products like headphones and laptops. Tile is a small company. We only have about 100 employees, but we have over 180 patent assets, and much of our success can be attributed to our ability to collaborate with a wide, diverse group of tech partners. That includes Hewlett-Packard, Google, Amazon, and importantly, Apple, who we've partnered with since about 2013. But last April, things began to change. Last April, reports came out that Apple was developing a competing Tile-like device, and shortly thereafter, they told us that they weren't going to carry us in their retail stores anymore. But don't get me wrong, Tile welcomes competition, but it has to be fair competition. And in the weeks and months that followed those initial reports, Apple exploited its market power to advance its own interests at our expense. And I'll explain. So first, Apple's Find My app competes with Tile. Importantly, Find My is installed natively on Apple hardware to the exclusion of all competing apps, and it cannot be deleted. Not so with Tile. Also, with iOS 13, which released last September, Apple made it more difficult for our customers to enable their Tile devices by burying the required permissions deep within the consumer setting. But not so for Find My. Find My's location settings are activated by a single selection during operating system installation. And then once our customers figure out how to enable our devices, also with iOS 13, Apple started surfacing these reminders and prompts to our customers to encourage them to turn it off. But Apple does not serve any reminders for its customers to turn off Find My's location permissions. Also, in its latest iPhones, Apple included a new non-proprietary technology. It's kind of like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It's called UWB, Ultra Wideband. Again, it's non-proprietary. It's one of those things that that would ordinarily be opened up to all third parties to use. What it is, it's similar to Bluetooth, but whereas Bluetooth can tell you that an item is in a room, UWB can tell you exactly where it is in that room. Reports surfaced that Apple's competing Tile hardware product would use UWB to enhance the experience of its customers. But again, by contrast, Apple is not enabling Tile to use that technology for the benefit of its customers. All of these examples demonstrate that Apple is acting as a gatekeeper of third-party access to permissions and technology in ways that favor its own interests. Keep in mind that Apple owns the entire commercial iOS ecosystem. They own the hardware, they own the software, they own the App Store and the retail stores. That gives Apple access to competitively sensitive information, including who our customers are, our retail margins, our subscription take rates. And Apple's control over the ecosystem enables it to make changes to the OS with no meaningful advanced consultation or notice to competitors to enable us to evaluate or prepare for impact. It's like playing a soccer game. You might be the best team in the league, but you're playing against a team that owns the field, the ball, the stadium, and the entire league, and they can change the rules of the game in their own favor at any time. That's the field on which we're competing with Apple. That's the field on which America is competing with Apple. And it doesn't leave much incentive for entrepreneurs or investors to bring new innovations to bear in America. The functioning of a robust, healthy app ecosystem is dependent on open platforms that do not favor the owner. It's our hope and preference to work with Apple to resolve our concerns. But in the meantime, we ask Congress to continue to explore how Apple's exploitation of its market power to advance its own interests is used to hinder competition and limit customer choice. I'd like to again thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Daru. We'll now begin questioning under the 5-minute rule. I'm going to recognize myself first for 5 minutes. And I'm just letting my colleagues know I'm going to devote 5 minutes to each of the panelists. So we'll have multiple rounds. You're free, obviously, to do it any way you like, but I think these require kind of more in-depth discussion. So I'll begin with you, Mr. Spence, and thank you for your testimony. In your written testimony, you describe how Google and Amazon have become essential business partners. As you note, their dominance across markets from voice assistants and operating systems to music services and cloud computing means that, and I'm quoting you, they are like basic infrastructure, end quote. You note that this dominance enables the platforms to issue take it or leave it demands. Can you describe what some of those demands involve and what they've been?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. It's around things like our future products, so understanding what products we're going to be making in the future if we want access to their services. So they'll look for that, which is really, at the end of the day, the most important thing inside a company like ours is trying to keep confidential the products and the new innovations that we're working on, so getting access to those, getting access to the kind of volumes that we think we'll do as we go through that, trying to understand as well just the general direction of where the company is going, making sure that that we are willing to engage in marketing funding for the products as well on the platform would be another example as we go through that. So yeah, that's probably the kind of a good feel for the.
Thank you. In a set of questions that I sent to Google as part of this investigation last year, I asked the company whether it ever requires that third parties seeking to access Google's services give Google access to their proprietary data. Google responded that it is likely entered into those types of contracts, but that any such contractual terms are, and I quote, the product of good faith negotiations by sophisticated parties, end quote. Does that sound accurate to you? Is it the case, as Google suggests, that these contractual terms are just the product of regular business dealings?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I've been in consumer technology for 20 years. I think there are times where you're having negotiations with companies and it's on a fair basis in terms of where you are. I think, as I've indicated, there's such a dominant power that exists with these companies that when Google or companies like that are asking for these things, you really, even for a company of our size, feel that you have no choice but to provide them to the companies.
One remarkable thing about these companies is how integrated they are across many different business lines. Sonos may be negotiating with Amazon or Google over their voice assistant services while also being dependent on Amazon's retail platform or Google search. Is there reason to think these platforms do, at the very least, or they could, use their dominance in one market to apply pressure in a distinct market?
Absolutely. I think that is the risk that is here, and I think it's very fair assumption to think that they would, even with best efforts, right? In terms of that, is that information inside companies, the larger and larger they get, it's easy in this day and age for that information to go many different directions. And so as we provide information to these companies, it's certainly my concern that it can be shared across groups and that can be used to, in effect, compete with us down the line.
So as an example, could Google demote you in search rankings if it didn't like how negotiations over voice assistants were going? And how would something like that affect your business?
Oh, that would be something that would dramatically impact our business. As David had mentioned, we've had to buy our brand name on Google just to make sure that we're at the top of the rankings in Google search. But these companies have the power to be able to move you down the rankings, put tags on your products, do all sorts of things that would tilt the playing field.
And Mr. Spence, in your testimony, you explained that Google has sought to block an innovative service by Sonos that would have allowed consumers to utilize multiple voice assistants on a single Sonos speaker. Can you tell us more about Google's role in blocking this service and the effect of this decision on your product and on consumers? And how was Google able to make that demand, and who benefited from the outcome?
So probably the best way to think about what it is that we want to do is just like on your computer today, you could choose to use one search engine. You could use Google, or you could use DuckDuckGo. We want to give customers the ability to access either Amazon's Alexa service or Google's Google Assistant voice service on a Sonos speaker. And we've developed the technology which enables that, which is new, innovative, and the best thing for customers because it's choice. And we'd be happy to put other voice assistants on there as customers so deem it. We developed that, we had it ready, we showed it to Google and Amazon. To Amazon's credit, they said, okay, this makes sense. Amazon has led recently the voice interoperability initiative to try and drive customer choice. Google has said, if you're going to do that, Google Assistant will not be available on the Sonos platform. So you will not have access to Google Assistant if that's the way you want to run this. And so they haven't allowed us, and we can't offer that today, which is, in my opinion, really reducing freedom of choice for customers.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to mention something that I did mention in my opening statement, and that is I think there is great bipartisanship in an examination of this. And hearing each of the individuals testify today, I think it is clear that there is abuse in the marketplace and there is a need for action. The question I have for each of you really is, I hear the problem, I don't hear the solution. And I am a small government person, and I am concerned about the government interfering in the marketplace because it may ultimately interfere with your ability to produce the products in the free marketplace that you want to produce them. I first want to say, Mr. Hansson, thank you for dressing the way you did. That's the way I'd like to dress. I don't want to wear a tie either, and you sort of have the image of a tech person, a tech executive in my mind. So when I grow up, I want to be just like you.
I'm happy to play the part.
Mr. Spence, I heard you talk about Google and how they created a competitive product. Would you advocate that the government or regulators in some way prevent a Google from creating a competitive product?
We've competed, in the market against many great companies, Bose, Sony, many companies. I think the difference in the case here is that these companies are leveraging their power in one market to, go into new markets where there's predatory pricing, and they're doing it to uphold their dominance in other markets. And so I don't know what the answer is in that particular case, but they're doing that, and they're infringing the intellectual property, the invention of a smaller company like ours in those cases. And so I think we're in a unique position where I'm with you in terms of small government, but I think the whole spirit of trying to encourage small companies, encourage new innovations and new startups is at risk given how dominant these companies are. I would argue that we have not seen anything like this before in the level of dominance, at least in my 20 years of experience. And so I think there may
Certainly seen it in other areas. We've certainly seen the Rockefellers. We've certainly seen dominance in steel and dominance in other products. So what I hear you saying, and I want to make sure that I hear it correctly, you aren't opposed to large companies, Bose, Google, others, creating a competitive product. What you are opposed to is that competitive product. The pricing structure of that competitive product is something you believe is predatory. They are selling it below cost or below at least market value because they want to knock the competitors out of the market, and they're using their platform to do that.
That is correct.
And do the antitrust laws now cover that? Are we looking at a situation where we need to adapt antitrust laws to high tech? Or are we looking at a situation where we need to give the federal government more resources to enforce the laws that exist?
I do not have the depth of understanding of antitrust laws necessarily, but I would say...
Neither do I, and I'm on the committee.
What I would say is my understanding of the spirit is such that it would address these kind of behaviors. So to me, I'm not sure if it's enforcement or the laws, but I would think that this level of power with this few firms, we should have rules in place which allow the Congress to act, or for there to be remedies that are put in place. And I just don't see it happening today.
So I guess I'm still struggling. I want to figure out, do you have, is there a way for us to receive information about the predatory pricing? Obviously, we don't know how much it costs Google. They are such a large company. They may have some benefits in terms of the size of the company and producing something that they can do more efficiently than a smaller company. I don't know. But what evidence is there that they are selling something at a price that is below the cost in order to be predatory?
There are some industry analysts that do this kind of work to understand the cost profile. We obviously understand the cost profile given the industry we're in. So in looking at that, we're quite confident. There's been executives that have made comments from these companies that say, that they're doing it for other strategic purposes, really to get their other services into people's home and lock those in. So that information is available. And I think from, I would say as well, unbiased third parties, right? Because that's where I imagine you probably want to get it from, and that is available.
Thank you very much for your time. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Nagus for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, thank you for hosting this hearing here in Colorado and in the 2nd Congressional District in particular, which is a hub nationally for ingenuity and technology innovation. And so it's a pleasure to be able to welcome you here. And of course, very grateful to my colleagues, Mr. Perlmutter and Mr. Buck, for joining as well. And want to give our regards to Mr. Sessenbrenner, the ranking member, who I understand had planned to attend, but unfortunately could not due to a storm in the Midwest. This hearing, it couldn't be more important, it couldn't be more timely, and so I appreciate the witnesses, each of you, for coming forward today and offering your testimony. The presence of research institutions like CU Boulder and Colorado State University, access to a healthy venture capitalist community, home to startup incubators, and the ability of local government to read the tea leaves really has turned Colorado in particular into an entrepreneurial and a tech powerhouse like no other. And so it's no surprise that Boulder and Fort Collins rank in the top 10 of America's most innovative tech hubs. And I'm proud to represent both of those cities. And of course, would be remiss if I didn't start off my remarks on that front. I also want to say thank you to the University of Colorado for hosting this field hearing. This is the second that we've been able to hold in the last year here in the 2nd Congressional District, and I'm very grateful to everyone here at the University of Colorado and the law school in particular for their generosity and graciousness in hosting us. I want to focus my questions on 2 topics. The first is data and targeted internet advertising, and I reviewed the written testimony of each of the witnesses, and Mr. Hansson in particular, I found your written testimony very compelling. There's a line, I don't believe you said it during your oral testimony, but I will read it here, where you say, quote, Facebook's targeting capability is crushingly effective and therefore truly terrifying. And I found that to be a very compelling sentence. Targeted ads really are one of society's most destructive trends. They have led to an explosion of fake news and misinformation, and it requires us to question whether it's possible to have free and fair elections when social media platforms like Facebook not only allow but encourage the mass propagation of misleading information and then supply the tools to micro-target that information to its users. So I wonder if you can provide some more detail on your company's experience with Facebook and the use of targeted advertising tools. I understand that you are a Facebook-free company, I think is the way that it's the moniker is that you don't use Facebook advertising anymore. That was a conscious choice that your company made. So maybe you could expound a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. In 2017, we ran a series of marketing campaign tests on different platforms. We ran some on Facebook, we ran some with Google, we ran other platforms. It was very clear in all of those tests that Facebook was by far and away the most effective way to market because of the immense amount of personal data that they have. So we could target our ads to just an astonishing degree. And no other advertising platform was able to compete. And this is why Google, who also has the same sort of capabilities of targeting, and Facebook is able to capture 99% of all growth in internet advertisement, as was stated in that report from 2016, because they simply have a devastatingly effective machine. But when you think about why that machine is so effective, what is it that underpins it? How is it that they're able to outcompete everyone else? it is all based on a fundamental violation of privacy for people, that they've been able to capture so many data points through so many sources that people are neither aware of is happening or would consent to if they knew. All these data sources, things like purchasing records, the fact that both Facebook and Google can track you, everything you do on the internet pretty much, because they have their little like buttons and they have their Google sign-ins on so many sites. The fact that Google controls things through search and Facebook controls the main avenue that people get news through the news feed. They just have so much data. No one can compete against that trove of data. And in fact, they shouldn't have been allowed to gather that data in the first place. If they didn't have all that data, if there had been regulations in place to prevent them from gathering all this data, then they wouldn't have been able to capture 99% of the growth. So I think that this is where we need to start with the original sin, that they are able and allowed to capture this data without consent, without informing consumers, and therefore they are as effective as they are.
How has it impacted your business becoming a Facebook-free?
Yeah, so this is the other part of it. If you look at that system and say, I want no part of it, I do not want to be part of a violation of privacy on this mass scale, and you opt out, as we've chosen to do, you've essentially cut yourself off from the main effective way of reaching people online that other companies will use. So our competitors, who have no qualms about using this machine, they will outcompete us when it comes to ads. They can buy cheaper ads that reach more people and is more effective in its conversion. And we are thus at a grave disadvantage in a competitive marketplace when we choose not to do so. So this is why the pressure is so high. It's like a prisoner's dilemma. If the other company chooses to do it, you're pretty much forced to do it too, even if you don't want to.
The chair now recognizes the other gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the university and panelists. Thank you for your testimony and quite frankly, your courage to be here today, because when you take on, dominant players as, whether it's Amazon, Google, Apple, or Facebook, you got to have a little trepidation. I think somebody used that term in their testimony. But I can tell you, our family is a customer of pretty much everything that you all are selling, although my daughter is the one that uses Shopify that has the backstop in your software. So I just want to thank you for the products that you sell and that you've designed and innovated. The thing that I really am bothered with, and I'll start with you, Professor, is the bullying piece. And I think, Mr. Hansson, you used extort, and Mr. Rue, you didn't use it, but the word squeeze came to mind in what's happening to Tile. So how in the world can Google, or I think it was Google who was problematic for you, Mr. Barnett?
It was Amazon.
Pardon me, Amazon, ignore the contract that you entered into and just say, sorry, that was our contract, but you got to lower your price.
With coercive tactics, basically. And these are tactics that are mainly executed by phone. It's one of the strangest relationships I've ever had with a retailer. It's with Amazon. Most of our discussions are by phone. They feel very scripted. They don't feel authentic. And by the way, I hear the same, what I describe, I hear from lots of other manufacturers, brands who deal with Amazon. So what's on record is an agreement that appears to be negotiated in good faith, the terms of the agreement, it's all there. And then what happens in practice is that there are frequent phone calls. And on the phone calls, we get, I don't know, what I might call bullying with a smile. Very friendly people that we deal with who say, hey, by the way, we dropped the price of X product last week. We need you to pay for it. And I think to myself, well, that's odd. It's not in our agreement that we're going to pay for it, so why do you need us to? And we expect you to pay for it. So there's some pushback. And I said, well, it's not in our agreement. Why would you expect that? That's strange. It's not in the agreement. The response is, well, if we don't get it, and then the threats come. If we don't get it, we're going to source product from the gray market. So one of your resellers who's not...
They say that to you?
Yeah, sure. The response is, if you don't, on the phone, sure. The response is, if you don't fund this, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get more competitive pricing, and we're going to go to one of your resellers who's not authorized to sell to us. And we're going to start sourcing it, and we'll find it.
So then your only recourse was to terminate the contract?
That's one of the things they say. Another threat might be, we've got too much inventory on our hands, so we're going to ship it all back to you. You're going to pay for all the fees. There's an expense to shipping this back to you. So we're going to end up charging you all of those dollars. So really, we need the money. Let's have it. And also, maybe we need to end the partnership is another threat. And if we end the partnership, that puts us in a pretty tough position given Amazon's dominance in the online marketplace. So this is tiring. I mean, it's tiring week after week saying no, 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 being subjected to this sort of bullying. And we eventually, decided to end our partnership.
All right, let me turn to Mr. Hansson and Mr. Daru. So in connection with your companies, you provide all sorts of information to Apple, to Google, to whatever, and then how do they use that information against you?
Maybe go ahead.
I mean, don't they have a
Thank
conflict
you.
of interest of some kind, or?
Thank you for your question. I would think so, and I want to be clear that it's not that we are giving access necessarily to Apple, but by virtue of Apple's ownership of the entire iOS ecosystem, they get access to a lot of competitively sensitive information, like who our customers are, what other kinds of apps they use, the demographics of people who might be looking for tile-like apps in ways that we can't. They have access to our retail margins they shared and our profits. They know who's picking up our subscriptions. And unfortunately, it's really difficult for us to know exactly how they're using it, but they certainly have access to it.
I think my time is about to expire, so I'll yield back to the chair.
I thank the gentleman. I'd like now to turn to you, Mr. Barnett. During the subcommittee's hearing, again, in the course of this investigation in July, Amazon's Associate General Counsel, Nate Sutton, denied that Amazon wields market power in online retail, testifying that the retail industry is full of competitors to Amazon, including companies like Walmart, eBay, Target, Safeway, Wayfair, and Kruger, as well as Alibaba and Rakuten. Mr. Sutton also claimed that sellers have numerous options when considering where to sell their products. And so my question for you is, for businesses like pop sockets, do the companies Amazon listed serve as reasonable alternatives to selling on Amazon?
Sure, I can give you some actual numbers. We sell on the Walmart platform. Our sales on the Walmart platform are about 1/38 of the sales that we had on Amazon back when we had this relationship with Amazon. 1/38. So, and Target, it's even less. So I don't know what it is. But
So those aren't reasonable alternatives.
these are small fractions.
Yeah.
If you back up, what they're saying, what he's saying is in a way true. It's just irrelevant. If you back up and look at this, I think it's easiest to look at it as if it's a different country that we're looking at, and ask this question. Suppose you discover of some country, say it's Costa Rica, and you discover that they have this marketplace, lots of marketplaces, but most of them are really tiny. They have one big marketplace where almost everybody goes to trade. They trade goods and people want to exchange goods. And then you learn it's privately run. And then you learn the company or person running this marketplace dictates the terms of the transactions, dictates ultimately, directly or indirectly, the prices that are in these transactions, which indirectly dictates how much money companies have or individuals for innovation, for research. There's a private company running this marketplace. That would be pretty alarming, and that might be an instance where you say government should probably get involved here.
In his 2019 annual letter to shareholders, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos wrote that third-party sales on Amazon are soaring thanks to the services that Amazon provides to merchants. And he wrote, and I quote, "We helped independent sellers compete against our first-party business by investing in and offering them the very best-selling tools we could imagine and build." Mr. Sutton at the hearing said, and I quote, "We know sellers have other ways to reach customers, so we invest in them, support them, and make continuous efforts to improve their experience, including spending significant resources to root out bad actors and prevent fraud and abuse that harms both sellers and customers," end quote. Given your experience, do you agree with Amazon's statements suggesting that it seeks to act in the best interest of independent sellers?
I disagree with that. Jeff Bezos, I think when he makes this statement, I'm not sure that he can genuinely, believe his statement. So in our own case, we're not allowed to sell in that marketplace. Pop sockets have been banned from selling in that marketplace because Amazon Retail has chosen to have this transaction with us and many other companies. That's the language they've used. We're one of the chosen ones to be coerced, basically, into a certain relationship. And then as far as helping these small sellers, you can do your own survey and see what they say. I doubt any of them will be willing to come testify because their livelihood depends on it. And they will tell you about retaliatory practices. So they're used to it.
And thank you again for your courage in being here. In your written testimony, you describe your relationship with Amazon as one where they, and I quote, regularly dress up requests as demands, using language that a parent uses with a child, or more generally that someone in a position of power uses with someone of inferior power. Is it your experience that Amazon acts as though it basically is able to dictate the terms of your dealings? What does this look like, and why do you think Amazon is able to get away with taking this approach in its dealing with sellers?
The answer is yes. So throughout the relationship, strangely, it's by phone. This all happens, but that is the language. It's a language of one party being in power over another party that's powerless. We need this. We expect this, even though it's not in our written agreement. I think, in my experience, the greatest event that highlighted this attitude at Amazon was when we said, hey, we said it very nicely too. We said we're unhappy with a few things. We're going to experiment with another model. There's an asymmetry in the relationship. We didn't call them bullies or anything. It was very friendly. Their response was, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to leave us. That was the actual response.
I want to just get in one more question. You stated that you feel Amazon has retaliated against pop sockets for speaking out on Amazon's policies. Can you tell us more about this situation? What kind of retaliation you experienced? After terminating the relationship with Amazon Retail, did pop sockets experience any challenges with Amazon representatives? And do you think your experience has been unique? I think this is really important for us to understand.
Sure. So we needed to interact with various departments at Amazon after we ended our relationship with them, our direct relationship of selling to this retail team. And my team reported to me that they were just getting stonewalled with each department. The example I gave in my testimony was trying to get hundreds of thousands of dollars that Amazon owed us for incorrect chargebacks. They just refused to communicate with us anymore. So communication just stopped, department after department, and oddly, we were given the same reason. So we got one and only one sentence back by all of them. It said, researching issues in partnership. And then nothing. They wouldn't respond. So we had that experience, and I'm losing my thought on the second experience we had. It's not coming to me.
Okay, we'll have some time. Right now, recognize Mr. Buck for 5 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barnett, did you get a PhD in philosophy?
Yes.
I took a philosophy class once.
Let's talk philosophy.
I didn't do so well, so I went into political science. But I think you're really smart. And I always wanted to be smart. And you invented something, and it's what I love about innovation. And I always wanted to invent the pet rock. You remember that?
That would be great.
A lot of the folks up here are too young to remember pet rocks, but they served absolutely no purpose, but people bought them like crazy. And it had everything to do with marketing and nothing to do with function. And I always thought that was amazing. But where do you go if you don't go to Amazon? So you go to newspapers, less and less people read newspapers. You go to billboards, but where do you go? It seems like Amazon is so dominant that there is no alternative to Amazon.
Sure. I think Amazon will rightly respond to you by saying, no, there are plenty of alternatives. In the Costa Rica hypothetical example I gave, there are plenty of alternatives. They're just tiny, right? And some companies can afford to live outside the large marketplace, the hypothetical one in Costa Rica that I described, and still survive on these tiny, much smaller opportunities, a string of them. And that's what Amazon will respond. We are one of those companies who has survived this turbulence with Amazon. So we pulled out. We're still alive. We've lost quite a bit of money. So just last year,
So I want to get into a little philosophy with you here.
Sure.
What made America great? And I'm not getting into make America great. I'm just, what made America great? In my mind, it's the ability for you to compete fairly with somebody else who has another product, and then you create the next innovation, and that's how you compete.
Sure.
You don't compete with somebody, or you can't innovate if they're in a business world. And I know there are people in this world that don't like the word profit, but you can't compete unless you're making a profit.
That's exactly right.
And if there is a company, if there is a country that stifles your ability to make a profit, we will see less and less innovation in this country. And as we see less and less, and this is getting really philosophical, as we see less and less innovation in this country, we will not be a dominant player in the world because we don't manufacture at a lower cost. We innovate at a higher rate. You agree?
I fully agree, and that's why if you ask me whether I like small government or big government, I'll tell you I like exactly the right size government. So I want to know what can government do in each instance, and if government can take action that will help protect innovation without doing a greater harm, government should do that.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
And there is a harm here. Our resources, we have $10 million less to innovate this year. $10 million, we could double our innovation team. We have 30 people innovating all sorts of products. We could have 60 people. We could double the sorts of innovative products.
Let me ask you a question. We have time limits. I just want to get to this one point. What is the size of your lobbying budget?
Zero.
Mr. Spence?
Zero.
Mr. Hansson?
Zero.
Ms. Daru?
Nothing budgeted.
So what's the size of Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple?
I would.
You may not know, and you don't have to answer it because you're under oath. So let me just tell you something. Part of what we're dealing with here is the reality that they walk into our offices and they tell us their side of the story, and we very rarely hear the other side of the story. And somehow part of this solution has to be that public policy makers, elected, appointed, have to have access to that kind of information. So I thank you for being here, and I also would encourage you to make sure that we are accessible. We are trying our best to make sure that that we continue to create the environment for your kinds of companies. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. I would say the gentleman's comments are really important ones, and that's the reason, or at least one of the reasons this investigation was launched, because we really wanted to understand the marketplace, and that's why the testimony from these four witnesses, which I'm afraid represent just a small number of examples of what we know is a very pervasive and large problem. So we are again grateful for your being here. And with that, I recognize Mr. Neguse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't agree more, and I think my good friend Mr. Buck makes a very salient point, and it's the impetus for why we're here today, to be able to hear directly from you all. I've been trying to, the second point, the second sort of piece of this that I wanted to discuss was some of the issues that Mr. Hansson and Ms. Daru that you all alluded to with respect to Apple, and trying to come up with the right analogy for the fundamental issue that is sort of bedeviling us here, which is the distinction of being both a marketplace operator and a seller of one's products. Neither of your respective companies are marketplace operators, but you do sell products, and you do a good job at that. If one thinks of the traditional way in which we purchase a product in a marketplace, if you walk into a Target today, or a Walgreens, or a Walmart, and look for a flashlight, you may find any number of different companies that have created different versions of a flashlight, right? And they all, there is a profit motive there, and they're able to sustain their businesses by innovating and improving upon the the products that they've created. There is no fear that the store, the place in which they are purchasing this product, is going to take the information that comes with this product, create their own version of it, and essentially operate it to the point that it blocks out any other product in that category, right? And of course, that's not the case with Apple and some of these digital behemoths, because the App Store and the flashlight's actually a great example, right? Because prior to Apple creating the flashlight function on the phone, there were, my understanding, any number of apps that were quite successful, right, in providing that service. And of course, once Apple has decided to essentially do the same, it renders all of those apps superfluous and unnecessary. And I think, Ms. Daru, part of what made your testimony so compelling, and your written testimony in particular, is the information that you are providing as a company to Apple that in turn can be leveraged eventually to extinguish your invention. And I guess I'm curious if you can kind of expound in greater detail about the type of information that you have to provide to Apple in order to ensure that your app is accepted into the App Store. Because I don't know that the average consumer understands that level of detail. I think most folks assume that when you go into the App Store, it is a fairly basic transaction between Apple and a company like yours, where you're essentially placed into their marketplace, and that doesn't strike me that that's the case.
No, thank you for your question. Yeah, and Tile doesn't provide data, per se to Apple. But again, by virtue of their ownership of the entirety of the iOS commercial ecosystem, they necessarily have access to that type of information. So, like who our customers are, what our retail margins are, our subscription take rates. They are able to they have wholesale access to that information. And on top of that, we're seeing other actions by Apple, again, to further its own interest and put companies like Tile at a disadvantage. They put their competing apps front and center in front of their consumers. Tile is in the App Store with all the other third parties. Theirs is installed natively on the iPhones. They basically make rules about how the platform should operate, who and under what circumstances, who should have access to permissions, and then they exempt themselves from all those rules. They give themselves access to technology like UWB, but they deny access to companies who legitimately could use it to innovate for their own customers. They make changes to the operating system in ways that drain our engineering resources and make it difficult for us to innovate. And so, for all of those reasons, it's clear that Apple is exploiting its market power and dominance to gain an advantage in the marketplace.
Mr. Hansson?
I think actually the even more important point is the economic point. To sell software on the App Store, you have to agree that Apple takes 30%. What businesses just have an extra 30% margins to compete against someone who will charge themselves 0% margin? If Apple has a service, a competing service in the App Store, they have a 30% margin advantage right from the get-go. That's on top of all the other advantages they have in terms of information, setting the rules, and so forth. Just on prices alone, it's completely outrageous that they can charge 30%, that rate has stayed constant in the 10 years the App Store has existed. Meanwhile, we get...
That rate is standard? It's a 30% across the board?
You don't get to negotiate, you don't get to sort of... They made some tiny concessions around long-term subscriptions recently, but they're inconsequential. On the same hand, we have a credit card processing system that we use on the open internet, where we every week get conversations with processors who want our business, and they're all competing. And we can do it 10 basis points cheaper than the other guy, and the rates are 1.8% or 2%. That's what a competitive market looks like. A in-competitive market is what it looks like on the Apple Store. 30%, 10 years going. No matter how much revenue that Apple is processing through the App Stores, they face no competition, and they have such an unfair advantage.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Perlmutter for 5 minutes.
And I think all of us are up here on this panel, listening to Mr. Buck and Mr. Cicilline and Mr. Neguse. We're all on the same page. And so I want to start with you, Mr. Spence. In your testimony, you say dominant platforms are able to develop copycat products by analyzing sales metrics on their platforms and combining them with rich data profiles of their customers. These copycat products are then sold at cost or lower with no intent to reap a profit. They also can use remarkably similar trade dress and marketing campaigns. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So we, in our written testimony as well, provided some examples of advertisements from some of these dominant platforms that look remarkably similar to ones that we had, a year or two before that, even with the same dress, with using some of the same iconography, all of it. And they understand who has bought, our products, other competitors' products, and they can address these people in a way that we can't, and at an advantage that we can't. And so the advantages are like nothing we've ever seen before.
So talk to me about the rich data profiles, and everybody's touched on that a little bit. Talk to me about that.
Well, think about how dominant these companies are across how many dimensions at this point. The mobile operating system, the cloud services, the search, the marketplace of e-commerce. The list goes on in terms of the breadth of information that they have that they can share back and forth to really understand and draw a picture of almost anything, right? They see something that may be exploding on the cloud services, right? And they see applications or things or areas of interest there. They see something that might be of interest and really exploding like pop sockets on their e-commerce front end. These are areas just by nature, I think, of the companies now that we see, that then there appears to be a trend where those become markets that then they move into, right? If there's any market that is getting traction and is of interest, you see these companies moving into those markets. It's almost like the fear of missing out, right? And I think it's a fear that at the end of the day, this is a market that may threaten their dominance of the other markets. And so we're in this incredible cycle where every new market that you see pop up, you see these dominant firms begin to participate.
All right, last, and this sort of goes to my comment about, everybody sitting there has, you guys, I just appreciate your testimony and willingness to come and share this. So you say in your testimony, Sonos is strong enough and successful enough to say what goes largely unsaid, but remains very much on the minds of countless tech entrepreneurs. Can you elaborate a little bit about why, you have 1,500 employees, Ms. Daru's company has 100, why you feel like you have a little bit of an advantage in that respect to share today?
We started early enough, so almost 20 years ago, and we, when it was unfashionable, focused on profitable growth, not just growth at all costs. And we are in the fortunate position where I think we're strong enough financially. I'm taking a risk here, no doubt. We work closely with all of these dominant companies, right? So I think I am taking a risk, but I feel that this is a big enough issue that people need to speak out. And I feel like it's important that these issues come to the forefront because we have a responsibility to speak for those that can't.
And last thing, and I know we have somebody from the Attorney General's office here in the audience today, and from the Office of Consumer Protection, but I had suggested to him that consumer protection also be businesses such as yours when it comes to these dominant platforms, that it isn't just Mrs. McGillicuddy living down the street, but it is, Basecamp or Tile or Sonos or Pop Sockets. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Hansson, your written testimony states that Google has a monopoly in search. But in its response to questions I sent the company last year, Google wrote that it faces, and I quote, robust competition from other sites on the internet with intense competitive pressure on us to ensure users find what they are searching for, end quote. What is your response to Google's statement that it faces intense competition in search?
I think that statement relies on the fact of expanding the market so broad and so wide that everything is competition. It's like when Facebook said that they face intense competition from things like sleep, right? Like we have a limited amount of attention in the day. If we could make people sleep 2 hours less, that's 2 hours more they could spend looking at ads on Facebook. Google is doing the same thing by essentially saying that things like people searching for a product on Etsy, that's a kind of search, and that's also in our domain. No, it's not. If you search the internet, Google is it. We have the statistics. We see where our leads come from when they come to our marketing site. They all come from Google. No other search engine that matters has any market share that matters at all. About 40%, which is a low number for our industry, 40% of all our marketing leads come from Google. No other search engine provides as much as 1%. They have complete dominance. We could lose our listing in DuckDuckGo and we wouldn't even be able to tell.
Well,
Use our listing in Google and we may go out of business.
Well, and in fact, at a subcommittee hearing, Google said, and I'm quoting, when consumers search for information, they can choose among Amazon, Yelp, Microsoft, Travelocity, and many other companies like these that consistently report strong user growth. If you don't want to use Google, there are many other information providers available, end quote. And as you just mentioned, the search with respect to places like Yahoo, Microsoft's Bing, or DuckDuckGo rarely pass even 1%. So,
and also, just to that example, if consumers hear about Basecamp, they want to find Basecamp on the internet. Can they go to Travelocity to search for Basecamp? Are they going to find Basecamp in the travel listings there? No, they're not. There's only one place where you're going to find businesses that are online today, and that's Google. And that's why they have this tremendous power, and none of these other platforms matter in that regard.
and you noted in your testimony that Google is erecting toll booths everywhere. What are some examples of these toll booths? And you state that it was not always like this and that Google has introduced these toll booths over time. Why do you believe Google is imposing these toll booths, and what are the implications?
Yes. It used to be that Google cared very much about the user experience. They would endlessly give interviews about every little pixel mattering and how it was just so important to provide a fast service so people could find what they were looking for. Today, if a consumer goes to Google on their mobile device and search for Basecamp, the first thing that they will find is whoever bought that trademark term, which is usually one of our competitors. Ergo, consumers are not finding what they're looking for. They're not being presented with what they're actually looking for. They're being presented with an ad, and that's the toll booth that they're erecting. It didn't used to be like this. You used to be able to search on Google for what you were looking for, and you would find it because Google has a great search engine. The problem is they've replaced that search engine with an ad engine instead. So now they serve up ads first, and they dominate. You ask anyone who's in Google's listings, does it matter where you are on page 3? No, it doesn't. No one goes to page 3. Everyone goes to page 1 and they look at the first results. So we tried very hard and have spent 20 years building a good reputation such that we would be the #1 organic search term for Basecamp. It's just that doesn't matter anymore. The organic search term does not matter anymore. The only thing that matters is whether you buy the advertisement. We can pay off that essentially by buying ads on our own name. Why would we do that? Customers already know they're looking for Basecamp. They go to Google to find us, to find Basecamp, and now we have to pay Google to buy ads for our own name such that competitors aren't misdirecting them. It's a complete shakedown, and it should not be allowed.
And 2 more questions. One is, you testified that your company has undoubtedly given up growth to competitors because we've refrained from pursuing targeted ads. Do you think a new startup to establish itself has the option to not work with Facebook or Google and survive? And then finally, you also mentioned that Apple has retaliated against Basecamp for informing consumers that they can sign up online rather than through the app. Can you tell us more about this situation, how it's affected Basecamp, and how this policy affects users?
Sure. For the first question, I think the main thing here, just like with Sonos, is we were founded early enough that we were able to build up a brand name prior to these conglomerates having complete domination as they do today. So we have some brand equity that we continue to rely on, but it's being diminished. And if you were to start today, you would not have this opportunity. You would absolutely have to pay these platforms in able to allow consumers to find you and build your reputation. So I think the game is very different now, and that's the tragedy that we've seen. We started a business, we're able to grow it, make it successful because it was a free, fair, and open marketplace. It no longer is today, and now we're facing a brand new threat. In terms of the retaliation, we had one example where Our application does not use Apple's payment services. We refuse to pay the 30% fee, find it completely outrageous. So we have to go through all these contortions to essentially tell users when they find our app in the App Store that we are not using Apple's payment services, that we're using something else. Except Apple forbids you in the terms of the agreement to say anything of the sort. You cannot mention that you're using an external third-party payment processor, and if Apple finds any evidence of that anywhere, they will deny your application. For a long time, for over a year, we had a small link in the help section deeply buried within the app that would lead you to an external help site that would talk about the fact that you could purchase a subscription to Basecamp. For the longest time, no one at Apple cared. One time we submit an update to our application, a particularly enterprising reviewer finds that 5 pages buried deep, denies our update. Now we're no longer able to provide bug fixes, security patches, or anything else to our update until we remove that. So we get completely bullied out of having any way of telling customers how they can actually buy our product. Right. You see this, I submitted in my written testimony a screenshot of what Netflix, one of the other big giants, they can't even tell their customers how to pay for the product when they're on the App Store. It's outrageous.
Thank you very much. I recognize Mr. Buck for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spence, I want to clarify something with you. I'm sorry, Mr. Barnett. You said that you can't buy Pop Socket on Amazon anymore.
I did not say that.
Oh, okay. You can't sell.
Just to clarify the relationship, we quit selling to Amazon. Amazon was then reselling, so it would say sold by Amazon. There were plenty of other sellers.
So we can still buy it on Amazon.
In addition, we are now testing a relationship with that same team at Amazon. So as of in the last 30 days, you will see products sold by this Amazon team that we broke up with, over a year ago. So you may even see products sold by that team too.
Okay. Mr. Hansson, I want to visit with you about something, because I think there are two issues here that most of us agree on. There are a lot of things that we don't agree on. There are two things that we are talking about today. One is competitiveness, and the other is privacy. And we haven't touched on privacy, and I want to ask you to shorten your answers a little bit for me if you can. But one of the things that bothers me is when I buy something online, somebody now knows a little piece of information about me. And when I buy enough things online, they know a whole lot of information about me. And they use that information to target me. If there were 30 online vendors, they would each know a little bit about me. When there is one online vendor, or one search engine like a Google, that company now has a privacy, they have my private information as well as an interest in marketing. And I want to, if you could, and I know you don't have the philosophy degree, but I just want to, if you could, tell me a little bit about what your concerns are in terms of Americans and really people all across the globe giving up that private information and how it is impacting the marketplace.
I think that's a great question. I think actually personally as a consumer, it's the question that stresses me out the most. The fact that we are forced to give up our privacy to interact with the modern world. You cannot opt out of this data collection. If you want to use the internet, this is being done to you. You simply have no power. There's some good initiatives going on, CCPA in California and the GDPR in Europe that's starting to address this, that companies and platforms are not supposed to be able to just collect everything about you without your knowledge and essentially collect these dossiers that they can use to target you, because we're all susceptible to advertisement. Anyone who says otherwise is simply uneducated. If you know enough about a person, if you know all their weaknesses and their fears and their aspirations, you can sell them so far more effectively all sorts of things that they may not have bought otherwise and perhaps they shouldn't have pursued in the first place. The example I give in my written testimony is the fact that a woman who's pregnant, Google or Facebook may well know before her family does, because they can purchase things like a sales record from CVS that maybe there was a pregnancy test bought, or the fact that she searched on Google about becoming a new mother, and they can use that data to then sell that to advertisers who want to reach pregnant mothers. That's not a piece of information that they volunteered. They didn't sign up to say, oh, I would like to receive advertisement on this private fact about my life, and have at it. This is just something that's being done to them, and we need to provide consumers with protection so things aren't done to them, so their data aren't being used against their better judgment.
And that was the short version. So I want to go sort of one step beyond that with you, and what's the answer to that? Is there a limit to how much, how big we should let a company aggregate that kind of information? I got to tell you, my concern isn't, I don't really care if they tell 15 T-shirt companies that I'm out looking for a T-shirt, or 15 cowboy boot companies I'm out looking for cowboy boots. I'm concerned more about the ability of governments, the ability of police forces, the ability of people that would use that information for nefarious purposes to get that information. It's one thing to entice me into buying ice cream when I'm on a diet. It's another thing when you're trying to use that information in ways that I explicitly don't want that information used. And so what's the answer there? How do we have great search engines but not just one?
I think the number one issue here is simply to ban companies from collecting this information in the first place. And then the reason they're collecting this information is such that they can sell you targeted advertisement. If it was no longer allowed to target advertisement based on personal data, they would have no interest in collecting all this data. This data is solely being collected for the purpose of creating these ad engines. So if you essentially say to Google, for example, you can simply place advertisement based on my search term. When I search for a new car, Chicago, resellers of cars in Chicago, they can advertise. But they can't advertise on the fact that I owned a Toyota 6 years ago, or that I was in an accident and I might be more susceptible to advertisement for Volvo or something else like that. Ban the right of companies to use personal information for data targets, for advertisement targeting.
Thank you. The gentleman's time is expired. Recognize Mr. Neguse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to say a thank you to our Attorney General, and Congressman Perlmutter referenced this earlier. We had a chance to visit with him this morning, and he's been a national leader on these issues and on the antitrust front, working in tandem with the attorneys generals from any number of other states, and we appreciate his leadership on that front. I guess, as we get closer to the end of this hearing, Mr. Buck asked this question, I think, at the very beginning, and I think it's fitting that we sort of end on it as well, which is to say, the goal of this committee, at the conclusion of its investigation, the hope is that we would have a number of different statutory recommendations that we could make to the Congress to change the law, strengthen the law in antitrust, and also potentially some regulatory recommendations, ways in which the agencies that are charged with addressing these issues could act in a more muscular way, the FTC and others. I am curious as to whether, and this is a question to all four of you, as you sit here today, what recommendations would you make? What steps do you think Congress should take, whether that's specific legislation you think we ought to pursue, or, as I mentioned, perhaps on the regulatory front, steps that we should encourage or incentivize there? And, Mr. Hansson, you referenced this with respect to privacy just now in terms of one step perhaps that we could take, but I want to give each of you a chance to answer that question. I'm starting with you.
Thank you for the question, and I do need to correct the record on one thing. We are now spending $10,000 a month on lobbying, which I would much rather be putting into research and development, but is a direct impact of the situation we're in today. As I think about where I hope this committee is looking, I'm not educated enough to understand necessarily all the antitrust laws, as I mentioned before, but I would say looking at leveraging market dominance in one category to be able to dominate another category is something that has to be, thought through, right? How is that the spirit of the kind of world that we want to live in at the end of the day? And I think the other big issue is this notion of efficient infringement, as it's called, where these dominant companies can infringe the intellectual property and invention of other companies, and they do it calculating the fact that if they have to pay down the road, if that's enforced later on, they'll pay the fee. And by that point, the competition will be out of it, and they'll be so dominant that it's a rounding error at the end of the day. And so swift action on that front and material action is something that I think would help.
I raised two issues, one around the counterfeits and fakes on the Amazon marketplace, the other around bullying. As for counterfeits and fakes, we don't have the resources to fight Amazon. We didn't sue Amazon. We never will sue Amazon. We spent $7 million last year in legal battles against tiny players. Really tiny players. Imagine what it would cost to fight Amazon. We could use some help. It would be great if the government at some level stepped in and said, massive companies that are systematically violating intellectual property rights of small players are targets for the government, and the government needs to step in. That's one thing with the fakes. And then second, with the bullying, there's two pieces to it. There's Amazon as a bully as a retailer, and Amazon as a bully running a marketplace and dictating the terms of the marketplace. And they're connected, but it might be a good idea to separate these two out and say, Amazon, let's break you into two companies. One, if you want to sell on this marketplace, great. That's one company. If you want to run a marketplace, great, but you're going to run it according to certain rules where, especially if this is going to take 45% of the online revenue, then there's going to be certain rules to ensure a certain fairness and to ensure that players can play fairly on this and dictate the terms that they want. And if you want to take a fair profit, great. We'll reward you for developing this great marketplace, right?
I think actually there's a lot of history here. The last time a single company was so dominant in technology in particular was Microsoft in the 90s. And there was very direct enforcement of the fact that they were using their monopoly in the Windows operating systems to extend that monopoly to browsers and cutting off the air supply to Netscape. The government, DOJ, had an antitrust investigation, concluded that Microsoft was in violation of antitrust laws and tried to do things about it. And even if that intervention was not ultimately completely successful, it was still successful. Microsoft did not go from having a monopoly in the Windows operating system to having a monopoly of the internet, which was the stakes at the time. And we can absolutely do something of the same kind. The fact that Google has a monopoly in search is a problem in and of itself that should be tackled. This is simply too important of a resource for consumers, for businesses, that they can run it like they just so please.
The time of the gentleman, I would just wrap it if the last witness wants to give a quick answer.
Sure, I can do that. So we've talked about a few things that the impacts on Tile specifically as a result of Apple's anti-competitive conduct, and things like throwing new requirements at us out of left field, like this new Apple ID requirement that we have to now engineer into our products rather than innovate. They are, raising the prices of their or the cost of their rivals by engaging in aggressive advertising practices. All in all, that amounts to damage to Tile, damage to competition, and ultimately damage to consumers. And ultimately, and we're just one company. And so what we encourage is to continue to explore all of the different ways that Apple has engaged in this anti-competitive conduct so that we can shed light on what the best ways of addressing it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Perlman.
Just a couple questions, and Mr. Chairman, thank you, and to my colleagues from Colorado for letting me sit in on this today, because it's this is very interesting, and obviously it affects everybody, every day, and even if you get a couple more hours sleep, most of the waking hours that we all have. So, part of what we're doing is, I'd say the last really successful measure was breaking up Ma Bell, okay, and which ultimately resulted in a lot of innovation, but then consolidation again, which is where we are. And these companies are having their cake and eating it too. They provide the service, but then they provide a competing product, but they've got so much more information now, you're at a terrible disadvantage. So there's a new product out there. Mr. Hansson, you were sitting there this morning when I brought it up. So I serve on the Financial Services Committee, so the banking committee, real estate, all that sort of stuff. We had Mr. Zuckerberg come testify to us about an effort underway at Facebook to create a new digital currency and to create, in effect, a banking system that's not going to be regulated as a bank in Switzerland, kind of with some partners called Colibra, then the currency being Libra. You know, you had it, you talked about make Kafka blush, and then you have sort of a fear and loathing comment in your testimony. It says, back then there was excitement about the likes of Google and Facebook and the better tools and services they provided us. Today, the excitement is primarily replaced by a mixture of fear and loathing. So, in the context I brought to you of Facebook with all of its information and its ability to unbelievably target information, what's your reaction to them potentially becoming the biggest bank on the planet?
That would be a catastrophe. And I think the fact that they already have so much data about everyone, if we add in all our purchasing data on top, everywhere how you spend your money and how much money you have, no single company should have access to this much data. Second of all, why do we need another thing that's unregulated that they can control? Like, we already have problems just dealing with all the issues they've created in society as it is today. We need to deal with these issues first before they sort of venture off and try to undermine sort of currencies of sovereign countries.
And with that, I just appreciate everybody and their testimony today, and thank you for, and thanks to my colleagues for letting me participate in this.
I thank you, Mr. Perlmutter, for being part of this. I'm going to now recognize myself for the last 5 minutes, and then I know Mr. Buck is going to make some closing comments as well. I want to turn now to you, Ms. Daru. Your written testimony notes that Apple is a major distribution channel for Tile's products, but that Apple has introduced services such as Find My that you spoke about that now directly competes with Tile's business. Apple argues that Find My is not a real competitor to Tile's products because it does not use background data. How would you respond to that claim?
Thanks for the question. Find My, as its name suggests, is a location-based finding service. So is Tile. And Find My helps people find their Apple devices. Tile could do that too. And ultimately, Apple renders Find My as a native installation in all their phones. And it's a feature in every one of their phones, and they sell those phones. So they certainly are in the business of location-based finding services.
Thank you. You've described how Apple has made several changes that make it more difficult for customers to use Tile. For example, Apple now sends Tile users frequent prompts requiring that they repeatedly confirm that they've granted Tile access to their location data. Apple has publicly said that it makes these types of changes to promote user privacy. Is there reason to think that these changes, which might hurt Tile, are actually good for customers? And can you describe what else is different in the new iOS as it relates to the Tile app?
Thanks for your question. No, the changes that they've made are not good for privacy or for consumers. If you think about it, these changes that they've made, they actually don't make any information more private. The vulnerabilities that existed before still exist. Any bad actors that are out there are still probably acting badly. But what these changes did is they added friction, they added confusion, added annoyance to the customers of Tile, who got confused, wondering why they were getting all of these constant reminders, wondering if it should imply that Tile should not be trusted, and at the same time didn't apply the same mode of transparency to its own services. And I think that this is a really prime example of Apple using privacy as a shield to advance its best interests.
Privacy and data protection have been recurring themes in our investigation. And our committee is also concerned with the use of privacy as a shield for anti-competitive conduct. You mentioned in your written testimony that Apple has justified the recent iOS changes in part to enhance consumer privacy. Can you discuss how Tile uses, stores, or monetizes sensitive user data?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Privacy is of the utmost importance to Tile, especially given the nature of our business. Importantly, Tile only exists to help people find what matters most, to relieve a really large pain point in people's lives. They say that people spend at least 365 days of their life looking for lost items, and that's what we're trying to solve. Trust is of paramount importance. Importantly also is that Tile doesn't have any ancillary businesses that could use this data that's collected in a way that doesn't comport with reasonable expectations. We don't have an ancillary advertising business. We don't even have revenue-generating advertising in our products and services. Our only revenues come from selling our devices and our subscription revenues.
So you don't use, store, or monetize sensitive user data at all?
We we do not monetize or sell sensitive user data. We store some data for a very limited amount of time, only to provide the service, operate our business, and enhance the user experience.
Okay, and my final question is, your written testimony notes that Apple's control of the iPhone ecosystem gives it access to competitively sensitive information. Do you believe Apple's access to this information raises competition concerns?
I absolutely do. So in addition to the examples I gave earlier, for instance, when they were carrying us in their retail stores, we would even give them prototypes of our to-be released products. And absolutely, they have the power, and they've shown the proclivity to use that power to their competitive advantage.
Thank
So
you.
absolutely. Yeah.
Before that light turns red, my time is out. I'm just going to ask all of you quickly to answer yes or no. Do you think that you would have been able to successfully launch your companies and the products you've described to this committee in today's internet environment? Mr. Spence?
No.
Yes.
Mr. Barnett? Yes?
Maybe.
Maybe?
Impossible for me to speculate.
Can I
Okay.
qualify what you mean? We could stay in business. We wouldn't have enjoyed anywhere the degree of success we had today, but.
All right, I'm going to now yield to Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Daru, I want to end with you the way I started with Mr. Spence. I'm wondering about the answer, the solution. And I hear Apple creating a product and pushing you out of the marketplace with the creation of that. You can really find my wallet, by the way?
Absolutely we can.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm way past 365 days already in my lifetime. But what is the answer to? Should Apple not be allowed to create competitive products? Should Apple be restricted in its pricing or the way it regulates products in the App Store? What would you like to see if and I would trust the chairman absolutely with this. You know, he could just pound that gavel and say, tomorrow this is the way it's going to be. What would you like to see?
So when it comes to Apple, I would start with, we need equal transparency and visibility on their platform. We need equal access to permissions. We need equal access to critical technology. We need advance notice of changes to the OS that have a meaningful impact on our business. And we need rules that are applied consistently across the board to everyone in the ecosystem, including Apple. Like I said, we are one company and have had a significant impact by the anti-competitive practices of Apple. I wish I had all of the answers, but I'm here in support of Congress's continual exploration of these anti-competitive practices to better shed light and highlight how we can address these inequities, because ultimately the future of competition in the United States depends on it.
So you're all right with Apple creating a competitive product? It's the way that they distinguish or discriminate between the two products that is the problem.
So it's two things. So absolutely we welcome fair competition, but it has to be fair. You know, we're seeing time and again, Apple using its dominant market power and engaging in practices that put us at a competitive disadvantage. For instance, engaging in these aggressive advertising practices, putting ads online that look like tile ads for people who are searching for tile, diverting them to the App Store, raising our costs at the most critical times of the year. You know, they're engaging in these practices that ultimately put us at a very at a competitive disadvantage, and it's those types of unfair practices that we need to curb.
I yield back. Thank you.
Well, I want to first say thank you again to the University of Colorado Boulder for hosting us. Thank you to the 4 extraordinary witnesses that we have just heard from. You have demonstrated tremendous courage in being here today and describing economic retaliation some of you have already experienced, and so I want you to be certain to share with us that we do not expect that you will suffer any economic retaliation for coming forward and testifying before Congress, but if you do in any way, it would be of tremendous interest to this committee. I think, Mr. Buck raised the question of what's being spent by some of the big, large digital platforms in lobbying their interests, and there's not a corresponding lobby for innovators and entrepreneurs and small businesses. That responsibility falls to all of us. It's our responsibility to make sure that the marketplace is working, that it's promoting competition, that it's protecting innovation, it's protecting small businesses and entrepreneurs, and that's the focus of this investigation, to figure out how we get this marketplace working and what are the consequences that are being experienced by entrepreneurs and innovators and small businesses and consumers as a result of this tremendous market concentration. So you have contributed significantly to our work. I thank my colleagues for traveling back home and traveling to the hearing because it has added to what, as Mr. Buck said, has been a very bipartisan effort to really understand Congress's role in both modernizing the antitrust statutes, making sure antitrust enforcement is working properly, and that the resources are available to be successful. And so again, with deep thanks from the entire committee, this concludes today's hearing, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Buckford.
Okie dokie. All right, let me make sure that I have this stopped. Heading. Okay, so that was a very interesting hearing. Thank you for watching it with me. They talk a lot about they're from kind of big-ish companies now. At least I consider them big-ish companies. And they're talking about how they have a hard time competing, with something like Apple, the one lady was talking about. But Apple, of course, is going to use the fact that she's talking about competition that is on their platform that they pretty much own. And that, of course, is her whole, thing against it. But it's kind of, we're able to see, I think, where this is going to go in the future if they try to start posing regulations on these companies like Amazon and stuff. Amazon and Apple are going to be like, well, they don't have to list their stuff on our platforms, on our web pages. And I forget who it was, one of the dudes said that their revenue from, I think it was from Walmart versus Amazon was like 1/38th, and he said it was even less for Target, and that he didn't know what the reason was. Well, I think that the reason is that people know that on Amazon, yeah, they're going to get knockoffs, but that's kind of what they can afford, and so they're looking for some of those knockoffs. I like to shop between a whole bunch of different websites, so that I can try to find the best deal for stuff, and I use Walmart and I use Amazon, and I compare the prices on them, and Amazon is quite often cheaper than Walmart, and so I purchase things through them. And so he's, completely right that of course you're going to get more revenue from Amazon and everything. And that's part of the problem, is that these companies are like, well, we can't just completely get away from Amazon. Obviously, if you're a big company like PopSockets, Amazon won't let you anyway. But even if you're a smaller one, it's very hard to try to get your stuff out there. there are smaller platforms now that create easy to manage stores and stuff for people that are not wanting to do things on Amazon. I think Squarespace, I believe, has an easy to set up store. I know Wix does. But the problem with those is that as a consumer, if you're looking to buy a product from somewhere, you want to know at least the website. If you're buying like a knockoff thing or something that's cheaper, or it could possibly be, which is the view that you're going to have if you're buying a new product, then especially from a new seller, then you want to make sure that the person that is hosting the product is at least hopefully reputable, so that way you can try to get your money back if the product itself sucks. And so, people shop through Amazon, and you can list the same exact product for even cheaper on your, personal store, your Instagram store, your Wix store, whatever else. People are still going to go to Amazon because they know it, and Amazon does have some sometimes good policies about you returning stuff, so people tend to trust them more. And as I said, with them trying to afford things, you're gonna unfortunately have to make the choice sometimes to go for the cheaper knockoff version than the better one, because that's what you can afford. And these big platforms are definitely taking advantage of that. And of course, they're taking your information, your data, and selling it. As the lady said, her company is not just handing over data to Apple, but because they have to allow Apple to have full access to things within their app, so that way Apple can make sure that it's all hunky-dory to put on their app store, then they have access to everything. And it's the same way with a lot of these platforms that we see. You connect your whatever kind of account, your Facebook account, your Google account, your whatever account, and it's automatically like all of the information that those companies track on you, that other app, that other platform, that other game, little video game on your phone, whatever it is that you just connected, now that has access to all of your other information. So that's fun. Speaking of which, I'm going to show you guys something very quickly so that you don't have to, at least on one app, you don't have to connect it to like your Facebook or your phone number. And that app is Instagram. So Instagram is actually something that companies are using for advertising more and more. There's statistics that they use to gauge which platforms are best for advertising on. Facebook is a very, very good one. Twitter is, fairly good, but also Instagram keeps growing up more and more. TikTok is, of course, going to be one of the next big things to get out there, and, multimedia firms and stuff like that and SEO companies are definitely talking about TikTok and Instagram a lot right now. Now, I don't know anything, I know a little bit about TikTok, I know that it's probably just as bad, if not worse, than Instagram. And on Instagram, of course, it's owned by Facebook. So the Facebook account and the Instagram account, they're going to want to link so that they can have all of your information. And then they can give you ads on both platforms, and have all of your information to know exactly which ads to show you. They want to show you the best possible ad, that way it has a better click-through rate. The better the click-through rate, the more that they can charge as like an ad spot. So, Pop Sockets comes along and they're like, oh, we want to take out an ad with you, Instagram. And Instagram's like, okay, they put the ad up. The click-through rate is awesome, out of this world. And so they're like, okay, well, you can see, it's a great ad spot. You're doing great. We're promoting you wonderfully. So they can try to charge more. So let's quickly show you how to be able to use Instagram without having to download it on your phone or connect it to Facebook or your phone number or anything else. This is something that I had to learn how to do because I don't like Facebook. I don't like Zucker Bunny. Me and Zucker Bunny, we don't get along. So Instagram, since it's a good place to have ads and stuff and to be on right now to share that you are a company or you're a business or whatever, I do have an Instagram account. I don't have a Facebook account. Not anymore. There's a whole story behind that. So on Instagram, if you load it up on your phone, then apparently on the homepage you'll have a little plus sign that allows you to post something. If you are trying to access it on your computer, are you guys looking at the right thing? Yes, you are. Okay. If you are trying to get onto Instagram on your computer and using an incognito browser or something like that, then they're going to make it harder for you to post photos. The idea behind this, of course, is that you will get irritated with it. You will download the app, which of course is connected to your phone number, and you'll probably connect it to Facebook and all these other kinds of things. I'm going to show you how much they actually try to push connecting it to Facebook and everything on you. So this is what I see when I go to Instagram.com. You can see there's no spot for me to post anything. The little explore button thing is just suggested people and stuff. Heart doesn't show anything. The profile, apparently on the profile there's another spot where you can post stuff, but you can see on the web browser it doesn't show it. The only thing really that it lets you do is find Facebook friends and connect to Facebook. You can upload a video, 1 to 60 minutes long. You can save stuff. You can view your tagged things, but posting the pictures, it doesn't want you to do, which obviously a lot of people get Instagram for, is to post the little pictures quickly and stuff, or ads or whatever. So it wants to make this as hard as possible on you. If you're trying not to connect your other things. So this is what you do. You right click and then you hit inspect. Now this is a Windows 7, so like it's not high tech or nothing. I can do this on Windows 10 as well, so this will work the same on both. Mac, I don't know. Now let me make sure quickly that you can see everything I'm trying to show you. You know what, I'm going to have to turn off quickly my graphics. I'm sorry, I have to find the right ones. This one. Is that the right one? That one. I'm turning off the things on the wrong thing. That's what the problem is. And okay, there's one. I'll just go ahead and turn off this other one too, so that way you guys can see easily. Okay. Alright, so I know it's a little bit hard to see because it shrunk it all down, but I right clicked and then I hit inspect. So at the top you'll see that it says, actually it's supposed to say responsive up here. When you right click and you hit inspect, it'll say responsive up at the top, at the very top, and then you'll see it says, a little number by number, a percent thing online, and on the right hand side you'll have your whole coding table. Okay, so at the top where it says responsive, I want you to click on that, and then you're going to click on pretty much any phone. I usually go with the iPhone, but let's see if it works pretty well with the Galaxy 2. Now you click on that and you can see it didn't really change anything. Now this used to actually present the posting button, but I think they have done away with that, but that's okay because now just click on where it says connect to Facebook, but then we're not going to do it. You see, and you can see it looks all messed up because it's trying to present things to you as you would on the phone that you selected. So you click on connect to Facebook. Do not put your information in. Just click back. And there we go. Now it says share photo. So now you can share your photo. See? Yay! So that's how you do that. And then if you want to get back to the regular view, then just up where you switched it to the phone view, just switch it back to responsive. And how do we, oh yes, and then click the little X on the coding table. So there you go. And now, again, you can view it normally, and there you can share your photos. Isn't that fun? So you don't have to connect your Instagram account to other stuff in order to be able to use it, even though they want you to think that you do. So I hope that was kind of helpful for you guys. That took me a little bit to figure out recently. It wasn't that long ago that I was trying to figure that out, and I found the old way to do it where you just switch the phone, you just switch to the phone view. My kid's yelling for me. And then it worked. But I had to figure out, you gotta make it think that you're gonna connect to Facebook, but then just don't do it. So there's that, and thank you guys for watching and joining. To me, this whole topic is something that I find very concerning as somebody that is trying to get, the word out that I'm producing stuff, that, I'm making things and everything. It's kind of almost like being a small business, because you are competing with these bigger, companies that have all of the money and everything. They have the ad space, and they can just kind of control it. And again, some of the previous hearings, this was part 5, and the previous hearings had more to do with online information and journalism and media and that kind of stuff, and sharing that information. So if you are interested in those, then look up the House Judiciary Committee on YouTube, and they have all of the videos on there still. And again, the one that was streamed today was on the Colorado Law YouTube page. So there's that. And if you want a breakdown of what they were talking about, if you want to hear more of me blabbing about how they get your data and how they use your data, I did do a little breakdown this morning of some of the stuff that I knew that they were going to be talking about, and just explaining it in case, people are unaware of what they can really do with your data. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and make sure that you are subscribed and turn on bell notifications so you can be notified when we go live and when we put out videos. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our name is @GrowTheInfo. And check out our website, growtheinfo.com, for all kinds of good information and press releases. And thank you so much for joining, everybody. I guess that's all the blabbing that I need to do today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and, be safe. Be safe out there. Some crazy stuff happening in Virginia this weekend. I think it's this weekend. Or maybe it's next week. Yeah. So, y'all be safe. Be careful. Love you all. Thank you for watching. Let's go out with some music.